We are live.
All right. So, Nelly greetings to everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Dave Kumar Sunwar, and I belong to Sunwar Indigenous Peoples of Nepal. I serve as Community Media Program Coordinator at Cultural Survival. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the panelists and the audience who have joined us today for our webinar titled On the Front Lines, Investigative Indigenous Journalists in Action. So some important thing to know before starting, some housekeepings. The interpretation is available in English and also Spanish. So to access the interpretation, please click on the world icon in the button navigation bar to choose your language. And this event is being streamed live on Cultural Survival's Facebook and also YouTube pages. It is also being recorded and will be posted later on at cs.org and also our YouTube page so that you can watch it later, or you can also share it later for those who were unable to attend this live. And also a reminder is if you would like to support a similar kind of webinars and also cultural survival's work, you also can donate at cs.org/donate so that we can continue organizing similar kind of webinars and also continue our work. So for question and answers, which will take place at the end of the presentations, if the time permits, please use the question and answer feature to ask your questions if you have it. So this webinar is organized by Cultural Survival, and for those of you joining us for the first time, we are an Indigenous-led nonprofit organizations based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have been working in solidarity with Indigenous peoples to protect and defend their rights and support their self-determinations, cultures, and political resilience since 1972. And today we celebrate the 54th anniversary of cultural survival. And cultural survival envisions a future that respects and honors the inherent rights and dynamic cultures of Indigenous peoples, deeply and richly interwoven in lands, languages, spiritual traditions, and artistic expressions, rooted in self-determinations and self-governance. We do this through a 5 pronged approaches: grant making, advocacy, capacity building, indigenous livelihoods, and communications. So thanks again to our panelists who have collaborated with cultural survival in also other ways. And if you have not yet had a chance to read their stories, the fellows' stories, I really would like to invite you to read them on the Cultural Survival's websites. So let me tell you a little bit context about today's webinar, the title On the Front Lines, Investigative Indigenous Journalists in Actions, that actually brings together Cultural Survival's 2025 Indigenous Journalism Fellows who have investigated some of the most urgent crises affecting their communities across Asia, Africa, and Americas. From the impacts of the mining and militarizations to land defense, language revitalizations, and struggles of environmental justice. These journalists work within context of the risk and resistance to document truths that often remain invisible. In this webinar, each fellow will briefly present their investigative report and also share how the journalism that actually rooted in indigenous practices actually becomes a powerful tool for defending the rights of indigenous peoples. So we have invited our panelists to join us here today to discuss these topics. So I'm going to briefly introduce them, then we will jump into the discussion right later on. First of all, we have Akash Puyam. He's joining us from Chhattisgarh, India. And Akash is a brilliant writer and researcher whose work you have likely seen in The Caravan, Al Jazeera, or Port Site Reviews, and so forth. And he has worn a lot of hats from teaching journalism in Chennai and now leading a massive independent research project looking at the state of indigenous journalists across 7 Asian countries. For his fellowship, Akash is shining a light on a really critical, overlooked crisis especially in North Chhattisgarh, exploring how mining and state violence actually leave the Adivasi communities who actually caught in a dangerous crossfire. Akash, welcome. And next, let me welcome Borumi Window, who is coming to us from the Bandiagara region of Mali. Boroma has been a force in journalism since 2016. And in 2023, he took a huge leap and launched his own weekly paper called Le Devoir, which means the duty. Through his reporting, he dives deep into culture, climate change, and human rights, with a special focus on his own Dogon community. For his fellowship, Boroma is tackling a massive issues, how climate change is specifically impacting women in Mali's Bankas area and affecting their access to basic essential services. Great to have you here, Boruma. And now we have another fellow, Lucas.
Thank you, Dave.
Kasosi, who is joining us from Kenya. Lucas is a Maasai journalist, digital storyteller, and head of the digital media and communications at Paran Africa and Fantastic Community Media House. He uses everything from photography and video to radio to blend the traditional knowledge or traditional indigenous knowledge with modern media tools to fight for environmental justice. Lucas truly believes communication is a tool for transformations. For his fellowship, he actually went dive into a major local issues related with environmental and economic fallout of unregulated sand harvesting in Kajiado. Welcome, Lucas. And the next, I have Nitsodimas Cooper from Botswana. And Nitsodimas is a filmmaker, climate justice activist, and passionate advocate for the Nama peoples. He has done incredible grassroots work, from setting up community museums and cultural festivals to bringing indigenous voices to massive global stages like the UN and also COP climate summits. His fellowship project is all about the resilience of Nama peoples, exploring how they actually use their deep connections to the land and also traditional wisdom to survive the changing climate conditions. Glad to have you with us, Nitsodimas.
Thank you for having me, Dev. Yep.
And at last, but certainly not least, we have Matthias Toko joining us from Tanzania. Matthias is a Maasai journalist and storyteller who has spent years producing and preserving for Maasai indigenous community radio, as well as freelancing internationally. He is deeply passionate about the finding ways to preserve indigenous cultures and also rights in our modern world. For his fellowship, Matthias will actually have looked at how the ancient traditional wisdom of Maasai actually can offer real solutions to modern day environmental damage actually caused by climate change. Welcome, Matthias. So, out of seven fellows we had in 2025, only about five fellows joined today. So now I would like to start with the presentations. The first, I would like to request Akash from India. And I would like to ask Akash for you to present your work, especially your work that you exposed a dangerous reality in Chhattisgarh. Can you tell us about the story that you investigated and what made you choose to focus on the cycle of violence, especially against the Adivasis? So I would like to request you to complete within your 5 minutes, please.
Yeah.
Akash.
Seva Johar, everyone. Thank you. I would like to thank Cultural Survival again for giving this opportunity, this fellowship, which gave me the opportunity to work on these stories. So I would like to kind of give the context of why I picked this issue or these particular sites by stating that about, say, 16% of total coal deposits of India is in Chhattisgarh state, where I live and where I work. And in the northern Chhattisgarh districts, there are almost 12 coal field sites, which has about 44,483 million tons of coal reserve. So this is very important because when you travel from central part of Chhattisgarh to the northern part, in almost every few kilometers, you can see the impact of coal mines. And because I grew up in around these coal mines, I was very much interested uh, to write about the regions which I saw changing in front of my eyes. So, for example, I picked two coal mining sites. One is operated by a public sector company called Southeastern Coalfield Limited, and the other one is operated by Adani Private Limited, private company. Both of these mining sites, I grew up around these mining areas, so I had relatives there, I had friends there, and I had been hearing stories about them, but I never had the opportunity to kind of write about them. For example, the first mining site would be considered a very small site of no relevance. In the sense that, for example, Adani still makes a buzz because of its international rapport and so on. But the first mining site which I wrote about that's the only story in English published about this particular mine. And I felt that, this fellowship has given me opportunity. So I was like, I will take these two mining sites. One is private owned, one is state owned. The common factor was that in both these cases, there was a clear violation of laws such as Panchayat Extension of Schedule Areas Act or Forest Rights Act, both of which grant or mandate, consent of the Gram Sabhas or village council. So this was evident from the pilot study that I conducted. I was also very much interested in how, say, these compensation and rehabilitation policies, which are being promised by these mining companies, how they have played out in reality. And this was one of the kind of anecdotes that I heard like 5 years ago, before I started working on this, was when I was visiting this particular mining area. A person told me that, this person who was walking by, he had, say, 1 crore rupees in his, he received as compensation money. But today he doesn't even have 5,000 rupees left in his account. And that anecdote had stuck with me. So 5 years later, when this fellowship opportunity came and I revisited, I especially kind of interrogated on this question on whether how these monetary compensations, which are say 50 lakh rupees, 75 lakh rupees, how they have not translated into any real time change or significant improvement into the life of the people. Instead, what it had done is it had ruptured the communities and it has fragmented the communities. The community was not anymore living together. Then I was also interested in how whenever there are stories about coal mines, there are rarely, emphasis given on how the loss of spiritual sites or loss of sacred water bodies, loss of sacred trees and forests and sacred groves, how that kind of impacts the community. So I think with these questions in mind, I wanted to was the reason that I chose these two mining sites, and I particularly was looking at the spiritual angle and also the rehabilitation part and how they have kind of in real time what is the status of these. And beside these, then I think there was also this, you can say the fake Gram Sabhas. Like in one instance, the first place where I was working, there had never been a consent of the village council, and the signatures were done through fraudulent means and so on. So there is almost like a repetition of this pattern in many of these places where, either through a corrupt official or through the village head, these things are done. And I was interested in, how, say, from mining to spirituality to identity, how they kind of get interconnected. Because when I was talking to the people, the displaced people, they had a sense of loss, which was difficult to describe, because they said that they did not even know how many people had died or how many people were still surviving, those from people who had displaced. There was a very popular saying, almost everybody said it, that those who gave their land for the mines, now today they don't even have enough land to bury their dead, is what everybody kept saying. And this was very striking, because you see, it was not just about loss of the spirits, loss of the land, and loss of the livelihood, but also as a community, as an individual, how they were ruptured now. That was something that I was quite interested to kind of see, and that's what I tried to kind of report through this Indigenous Journalism Fellowship.
Thank you, Akash. The saying that you actually brought really touched me, that you said that those who actually gave land to the mining, they even said that they don't have a land to bury their dead bodies. Really touchy, and it's reality, and that is human right violations. Thank you, Akash. Now I would like to move to and request Baurema to just tell that your project, basically fellowship, actually focused on the Bandiagara region. And
Yes.
could you please tell us about the story you investigated and why it was so important for you to highlight how climate change actually is affecting women specifically?
Okay.
Baurema.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone. As Dev said, I'm Burema Gindo, the founders and editor of newspaper Le Devoir. It means the duty. I'm very happy to talk to you about my investigative report on the Banyagai region. Banyagai is a locality in the central area in Mali. Is plagued by insecurity. So my project is focused on the working condition of women in Banyagra, namely in Bankas area, as they cope with the challenge of climate change. So the topic aims to understand how these women manage to cultivate their land despite the water shortage caused by climate change. So this report allowed us to discover the traditional method that those women used to combat this scourge. And these methods are explained in many of our reports. So there are some months ago, I went to Banyagara. It's located from 500 miles from Bamako. I went there, and in some villages in Bankas area, Koyantombo and Kurunde. These are two villages located at some miles of Bankas and Banyagara. We went there, and we discussed with women that are cultivating, they are the garden, they are working on the garden, and we exchange with them about their difficulties about due to the climate change. And during this exchange, they explain us how the climate change also the method of their work. So because of this climate change, they also change their method of work. So they were obliged to use the traditional mechanism in order to work in their lands. So these are this is about the team. So during this work, we have the biggest obstacles that is the access to the region, because as I said, Bangra is a region which is confronted by the terrorism. So even last week, about 100 people have been killed there because of insecurity due to terrorism. So the first difficulty we have been confronted is the access of this region, which is very difficult due to the presence of many group of terrorists. We spent many days traveling between Bamako and the region because of the risk of attacks. So we arrived there, so we discussed with women, and however we were still able to complete our trip for this report despite the difficult circumstance. Another difficulty is that some people, women namely, require significant more support to agree with interviews, because from many years the NGO that are in this region have been gone because of insecurity. The people who are helping them, everyone have gone. So those women now they have no person to help them. So when we went there and try to ask them some questions, they have been obliged to ask us for some support, because all their efforts are stopped because they don't have money. Climate change, because of climate change, because of insecurity, so they are in much difficulty. So the mistakes that people usually, namely journalists, use is they make are errors, those made by relying on distant sources. So journalists um, mainly don't have courage to go in this region because of the risk of attack. So they are obliged to give information that are not uh, uh, obligatory completed. So because thanks to community journalism and genuine journalism, we have gone there, we have met the people, We have discussed with them. We have tried to understand their problem and hear about their proposition. Here are the presentation that I have, Dave.
Thank you so much, Baudemay, and from your presentation, it clearly shows that indigenous women are the knowledge holder, and which is really play a role for the climate change adaptation, and they are the one facing a lot of the impact of climate change and the need is support. Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I would like to move to Lucas. That you have been looking, and actually you looked into unregulated sand harvesting in Kajiado in your country. Could you please break that down for us? What did you find during your investigations related with that sand harvesting? And why did you pick this specific issue? Lucas.
And thank you so much, Def, and greetings everyone. My name is Lucas Kasosi. I'm a journalist from Kenya. And through the Cultural Survival Indigenous Journalism Fellowship, I investigated the impacts of commercial sand harvesting on the Olkeria River in Mashuru in Kajiado County, Kenya. So at first, when I began this story, maybe let me paint a picture why this story matters maybe globally and beyond Kenya. So many people think about resource extraction, but they only think about oil, gold, and other rare minerals. They rarely think about sand. So according to UNEP, sand and gravel are the second most extracted natural resources after water. You find that more than 50 billion of sand is extracted globally every year. So every road you see, every apartment, maybe the scrappers, all of them depend on sand. So unlike the other precious mineral, sand is bulky, relatively inexpensive. It doesn't require many tools to harvest. But because of this, it is frequently treated as an unlimited resource. So when I walk out, my investigation sought to understand what this global demand looks like from the perspective of an indigenous community living where the sand actually comes from. So to understand why I went to Olkeria, this issue matters a lot to the Maasai because Arifa means the Arifa for the Maasai is not just about water. It is about the continuity in terms of livestock keeping, wildlife, the cultural rituals, and all the well-beings of the Maasai in terms of traditions. So many people have started raising serious questions about the river itself, which has been permanent long before, but it has been affected by now the sand harvesting. So this pushed me to go and listen to the community as an indigenous journalist. So I conducted this investigation by combining indigenous knowledge with the investigative journalism methods, where I conducted extensive interviews with the youth, women, elders, harvesters, the climate advocates, and the officials. I visited the extraction sites, documented evidence through photographs and videos. I also reviewed some environmental reports, analyzed some existing legislations and policy frameworks. But equally, I also returned to the community after producing the documentary and screened the film publicly. So this is really important in terms of indigenous journalism. It's an indigenous journalism principle that community should not be just source of information. They should remain in the participation process, where journalism does not just end in publication. You take it back to them so that they can see how they have been framed. So it's a very good thing, and in terms of trust building, where you develop long-term relationships through transparency and returning the knowledge to the community. So one of the key themes that emerged from my investigation was ecological memory. Across the generations, people describe a river that looked fundamentally different only a few decades ago. For example, I remember one woman, I call Sylvia, remembers the river where water filled the channel and to the brim, and the brim was never visible. So today, the river is exposed stones dominate the sections of the riverbed. A youth called William later recalled the stories told by the elders describing year-round water availability in the river. So the testimonies are not only nostalgia, they represent indigenous environmental knowledge accumulated through generations of direct observation of the river. So another key thing is the women who are really affected, women on the front line. Women experience the impacts of the river degradation most directly. Along the Olkeria River, I observe women digging deep into the sand simply to access water. So, and Leah, in fact, explained that before they used to fetch water easily. Now they dig deep. So that really feels an inconvenience to their normal routine of life. So the statement, the shift entirely is an hydrological function of the river. So now women spend more time collecting water, they travel longer distances, they face the physical burdens, and yet they remain excluded in the decision-making processes where men mainly dominate in the trade. They sell the sand, they don't share the profits, they only make the profits by themselves. Just to quickly go through this, the extraction inequality, in fact, is one of the most striking findings where sand extracted from Olkeria does not stay there, but moves to Nairobi, at the river in Kitengela, and other rapidly expanding urban centers within Kenya. So communities receive around 3,000 Kenyan shillings for a truckload, yet the same truckload can cost 10 times more than 10 times in the urban markets more than what it is sold in the local, in the ground level. So the environmental costs are local, and the economic benefits largely move outwards from the community. So this raises a very fundamental environmental justice question where who benefits, who pays, and why indigenous communities often bear the environmental cost of development occurring in their own lands. Another key thing I found is the governance gap and accountability. We found that Kenya has laws guiding the sand harvesting. There is the EMCA, Environmental Management Coordination Act, the county legislation laws. So all these laws exist, but you find that they are not being really followed to the latter. You find that in Kajiado, you find sand is harvested at night, and the framework is, the policy is about 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you find out that there is the legal or the existing governance structures are not met at all. So the indigenous solutions, when I talk to the community, in fact, they are not just complaining about this, but they have solutions. They are asking if they can be given sand dams, construction of sand dams along the river. So sand dams are very important in that they trap sediments, they recharge groundwater, they improve the water availability and support livestock. So the indigenous solutions already exist. So it's just a willingness between the authorities to co-work with the community and do this. So to conclude this, the Olkeria River is not simply about sand. It's about the future of indigenous landscape in an era of extraction. It's about who benefits from development and who bears the cost. It's about whether rivers are treated as commodities of the living systems that sustain communities. So the question facing Olkeria is not whether development shouldn't occur. The question is whether development can proceed without sacrificing the river, the people, and the knowledge systems that have sustained the landscape for generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. It is really important to document the ecological memory of the elders. Thank you so much for bringing these issues up. Now, moving from Kenya to Botswana, I would like to request Nicodemus that your project actually looked at the Nama people's deep connection to the land. Can you share what you investigated and why you wanted to focus on their traditional knowledge under this fellowship, Nicodemus? If you could just shorten your presentation within 5 minutes, that'd be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dev, for the question. And thank you very much for hosting us and giving us this much important exposure, because our stories are indeed global stories. And greetings to everyone joining us today. For my Indigenous Journalism Fellowship project, I deliberately chose investigating how climate change is affecting indigenous Nama people communities living in Botswana, specifically in the Kalahari district or Kalahari Desert, particularly in the 4 villages that I picked because of the vast distances between how big Kalahari Desert is. But I believed these 4 villages will really bring that important aspect of what I really want to tell. And I chose this topic because this climate change is not only an environmental issue for indigenous peoples, it directly affects our relationship with the land, water resources, biodiversity, traditional livelihoods, culture, and indigenous knowledge systems that have sustained our communities for generations. Growing up and working with closely with my community, farmers and traditional knowledge holders, I wanted to document how people understand these changes from their own experiences, lived experiences, because it is amazing how indigenous peoples express themselves better, telling stories or living experiences through their native languages. So I was particularly interested in traditional ecological knowledge because it represents generations for observation, adaptation, and resilience. So indigenous communities really possess valuable knowledge about weather patterns, water management, plants, sustainable living, that can contribute meaningfully to climate adaptation efforts. Because staying in a desert, you'd understand that having rainfall or finding water, it's luxury. So one has to really preserve that to take them a little bit longer period. Yeah, so the result, eventually came in as in a 24-minute documentary called Namakon Voices in a Shifting Climate, which tells the stories directly from the people. Like I said, that it's always good to hear people, indigenous peoples themselves, telling the stories and expressing this, seeing them express it in a language that they better understand, the language that they know, and it was not only hearing them speak, because I believe in even seeing the body language. There's also communication in our body languages. It's always good to see, and through visuals, that comes out much better. So for me, really, the fellowship was an opportunity to ensure that Indigenous perspectives are included in conversations about climate change, and that future generations can also learn from the knowledge of their elders, telling the stories about climate change, but also preserving the native language, which is something that in my community, I know is one of those urgent, issues that need to be protected. So yeah, that was the motivation behind picking up this kind of project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Nitodimas, for bringing. It is really important also to preserve the language together with ecological knowledge and so forth. That is really important. Now, moving from Botswana, I would like to move to Tanzania. Matthias Tuku, actually, under this fellowship, you looked at Maasai indigenous people's wisdom as a solution to climate change. Could you please tell us about your investigations and why you actually chose to highlight this indigenous solutions instead of just the problem? Matthias? You are mute. Matthias, you are mute. Can you unmute?
No. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthias Toko, and I'm a journalist from Tanzania, northern Tanzania. I'm a Maasai, and I was among the selected journalists in Cultural Survival Fellowship 2025. And I was documenting the Maasai indigenous community wisdom as a response to environmental degradation caused by climate change in Ngorongoro district, northern Tanzania. And during my fellowship program, instead of focusing only in problem, according to your question, Deb, I wanted to highlight the traditional solution that Maasai community have used to generation to survive in harsh environment conditions. And I choose this topic or this approach because many of climate change stories about indigenous community, especially Maasai, are only showing suffering, like drought, death of livestock, and poverty. I really agree that we have going through these challenges, but they do not tell the full story about the strength of this community, because Maasai community also hold a deep ecological knowledge that help them to adapt changing in environments. So that's why I decided to choose this topic. But through this program, I managed to interview traditional leaders, elders, a group of women and youth, so that they can be able to share their ideas. And I group them into groups so that every group can be open and free to share their point of views. So through these discussions, they share their experience to observe the way of observing stars, wind patterns, vegetations, and sometimes flowers in trees, so that they can discover and predict weather condition to make decision about grazing and water management. And these people actually have their own rangeland management system to make sure that they direct livestock from a certain location so that they can manage land for grazing according to season. Like maybe January to June, they direct livestock to a certain place to keep grazing for the dry season. So that through my fellowship program, this project resulted, I successfully produced 2 radio programs and aired through Loliondo Community Radio because I'm working here. And I produced also 2 articles, stories, and 1 documentary video that amplifying the Maasai voice in climate justice discussion. And all of this material have been shared through Loliondo FM platform, social medias, but also cultural survival social networks. And actually, I faced some obstacles during this fellowship program. And one of the biggest, at least, obstacles that I face, you know, in this community, Maasai exists in Maasai knowledge exists in oral tradition. They don't have library to keep the this important knowledge. This means that they had to spend. I had to spend more time speaking directly with traditional leaders, elders, and all those important groups to document the experience and knowledge. So it's one of the obstacles that I faced during my fieldwork. But also another challenge is accessibility. Actually, here in Ngorongoro, we have my project coverage area was like 3 wards and 5 villages in those wards. And some difficult, some villages are very difficult to reach. So most of the time, especially I remember last year in a very high dry season, when a community moved from one place to another. When I go there, finding someone to tell the story, and in my community, not everybody can talk. They have special spokespersons. Though you can find someone somewhere, and then, yeah, maybe he moved from one place to another, searching for the livestock, parks, and water. So conducting interview in such condition require time, passion, and flexibility, and sometimes budget. So those are the challenges that I faced during this program, this fellowship. But also, why this approach was relevant. For instance, when I grew up, other journalists come to Ngorongoro and write the story about our people. Mainstream media often report indigenous community only as the victims of climate change. So that like reporting drought, as I said earlier, focusing on mainly hunger, drought, displacement of the people, and poverty. And this type of reporting can ignore strength, resilience, and knowledge of these people. So that's why I decided to do this. For instance, here, we have only one community radio, which is Loliondo FM radio. We have other community radio, other radio stations, but Loliondo Community Radio is the only radio station that Maasai people can access. Even though we are not allowed to broadcast live full in Maasai language, but also what we did is to translate some important topics or programs to them, because it's like 30% of Maasai people who found in Ngorongoro district, they don't speak national language, which is Swahili. So that we have to translate so that our people can understand our program. So that's what we did. And also, for instance, through community radio, Maasai elders, women, youth can be able to share their stories about their knowledge, adaptation strategies, and the cultural values directly with listeners. And sometimes what we do, we invite government officials and interact together. So community media are accessible to many rural people who may not have access to television and internet platforms. Thanks so much, Deb.
Thank you so much, Matthias Tuku, and also bringing an aspect of some of the challenges that you faced during the reporting. So just giving a brief about what the indigenous journalism actually can offer that mainstream media actually failed to provide that one. So with this, I would like to ask follow-up questions to Akash. The same experiences that the Matthias actually brought, especially relating to the obstacles that your reporting on the state violence obviously is dangerous and incredibly dangerous. And what were the biggest, kind of obstacle or hurdles actually you faced? The first questions when you are producing a story. The second one is also I would like to ask the second question as well at the same time. Some mainstream, the so-called mainstream media often frame, the conflict that actually you were presenting from the government or corporate perspective. So what kinds of truth actually does indigenous journalism bring to this crisis that mainstream media completely misuse or they actually miss? So if you can, summarize in 3 minutes, that would appreciate. Thank you.
These are two different questions. You want me to take three minutes? Yeah.
None in 3 minutes, both, please.
Oh, okay. So just want to clarify that because initially what I had proposed in the Cultural Survival Fellowship was based in South Chhattisgarh. So I had mentioned militarization and state violence as a very peculiar thing, but that was not the case in North Chhattisgarh, where I eventually did my fellowship. So there were different kind of challenges there, which I want to discuss. First of all, was this because mining is such a sensitive issue which involves policing. There has been in both the mining areas where I worked, there were at least 20 to 30 people had been arrested or have had an FIR filed against them and so on, right? But so because of this, there was already a lot of distrust with anybody who came from outside. So when I started doing pilot study, even then, like if somebody uh, 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 as soon as I would reach these areas, people would, gather around and start questioning things. And it took me at least, I think, 2 to 3 months to simply be comfortable enough to be like, okay, now people can talk. Because the assumption is that a lot of the times the company sends people through different nonprofits or, activists or journalists and so on. So there's already a lot of hesitation. And I think building that trust was one of the biggest difficulty, I would say. And I also want to emphasize that this something like we say that we are insider to the community, but there is something, I would say, something like an inside outsider, right? So even though I am from the community, but because of my education and my work and so on, there has been like the community is still like when I visit the villages, it's still there is a bit of work that one has to do to get the trust and to build the rapport with the community. Second, then the difficulty was that because in these mining areas, many of the people had agreed to give the land. Now, the thing was that they had agreed to give the land not necessarily through free prior informed consent, but through different type of lures that the company gave. So it was not proper consent, and uh, because of that, people felt kind of guilty. People felt that they had they were complicit in kind of losing the forest land or to the company. And especially those who had taken the compensation money, they were even more fearful of talking. So it was after a lot of kind of conversation with people, when I could tell them that that consent means not simply even if they kind of try to lure you and give you money or take your land, that does not it's not considered as consent. Lastly, I think obviously because these mining areas are heavily protected by the authorities, it was very difficult to get access to, say, the second coal mine, the one led by operated by Adani, because I was stopped at there is a sacred grove which is still lies in the middle of the coal mine, or open cast coal mine, and that sacred grove has not been destroyed because of the resistance from the community. And I wanted to see that, and like so in any of those areas, the company would not allow you to go. Second, most of these the expansion where the mining is doing expansion, they have been restricted, so I had to go through a different way, a forest route or something. Similarly, the places from where the polluted water is being released into water bodies, these sites were very difficult to, not so easy to access, because there was always security guards and so on. These were the difficulties, and I would say that indigenous journalism, in what was it differs, or what it offers, especially in these kinds of issues, is that there is a absolute dismissal of these stories on mining and pollution in these areas. So especially, say, during the monsoon season, when the ash dump, the whole waste which is dumped near the villages, it flows through the crops, fields, and those issues are not discussed. And because the communities, those who are indigenous communities, indigenous journalists who see this much closely, I think they can bring these stories up front. And second, then I also feel that because some of the stories that affect indigenous people remain always in the peripheries, but when indigenous journalists cover them, they are not the peripheral issues, they are central issues. So, for instance, even things like loss of a sacred pond, it is not a peripheral small issue. It's a bigger issue, because it revolves it is part of a life cycle of the community, or the crop cycle of the community, or the livelihood of the community. So, indigenous journalism then kind of centers the indigenous voices and people. And then lastly, I feel that the cultural and spiritual life of the community, which is largely overlooked, and also because misunderstood, because a lot of indigenous journalists do not understand the nuances of these. And I think it's important that that indigenous journalists have seen take up these issues, because they see the value in the loss of a sacred grove or loss of a sacred pond. So I would say that indigenous journalism offers a lot many things. I feel new aspects of new ways of looking at the similar mining issue from different entry points. Thank you.
Thank you, Akash, for briefly presenting the obstacles that you faced and what the indigenous journalism can bring as alternative to the mainstream media. So similar follow-up questions to Boroma from Mali. Briefly, can you please tell us that given the ongoing conflicts and regional challenges in Mali, what were the, one of the hardest logistical as well as personal obstacles that you had or you ran into while reporting? And also the second question is, when mainstream media talks about the climate change or the conflict in Mali, what do they usually get wrong? And why is the community-led journalism is so different from this, the so-called mainstream media? So this, if you can address these two questions within 3 minutes. I think Borimi is not here. I think Borimi? No, I don't see. Okay. Perhaps he had an internet connection problem. With this, I would like to go with the Lucas, the follow-up question to you. In Kenya, especially, investigating these unregulated industries actually can get messy. And did you face any pushback, a kind of obstacles, or a kind of corporate hurdles, or a kind of local challenges while trying to gather your data or the footage? The first one. And the second question is, again, just like I asked to Akash, mainstream media might just view that sand investigating as an economic issue, especially economic issues. And how does an indigenous media house like Paran, Africa, tell this story differently to protect the indigenous communities' rights? Lucas, if you can just give a brief within 3 minutes max, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dev. Yes, there were several challenges. First, the challenge was trust. Many people living around the extraction sites have seen journalists, academicians, researchers coming to visit the community, collecting the information about sand, and living without even providing feedback or producing maybe any tangible outcome. So as an indigenous journalist, I understood that trust cannot be rushed. So I spent quality time listening before recording interviews. I spoke with the elders, the women and the youth, the sand harvesters, the climate advocates. Building those relationships is really essential because people needed confidence that their experiences will be represented accurately and respectively. Another challenge is the political and the economic sensitivities of the issue. Sand harvesting generates significant income and involves multiple actors like the transporters, the brokers, the landowners, the government itself, because it's collected revenue. So some individuals were hesitant to speak openly because they feared economic repercussions or conflict with the influential interests who are involved in the trade. Another challenge was logistical in terms of that many extraction sites occur early in the morning and late night, and in remote riverine location. So reaching these areas required extensive travel, coordination with the people on ground. So capturing visual evidence safely while also ensuring the community felt comfortable being documented required really patience and careful planning. So another challenge is balancing the complexity. Many people depend on sand harvesting for survival. So some interviews acknowledge environmental damage while also explain that the income supports either school fees, food, and basically household needs. So as a journalist, it would have been easy to portray the issue simply as good versus the bad, but the reality is more nuanced. So the challenge was accurately reflecting both the environmental harm and the economic necessity. So another an important part was returning to the community after the complete investigation. That is organizing the community screening of the documentary, sharing the findings directly to the residents, so that they now trust that what they shared is really making impact. So in indigenous journalism, accountability does not end with just publication. So for your last question about the mainstream media, okay, I think there is a big difference. The biggest difference is that indigenous journalism begins with the relationship rather than extraction. So mainstream media reporting often approach environmental stories primarily in terms of the economies, maybe policy debates, what is people are talking about, or just technical data. So in this case, sand harvesting might have been framed simply as a construction material or a business story. So in an indigenous perspective, you ask different questions. Instead of asking only how much sand is being extracted, we ask about what does this river mean to the people who live with it? How does environmental change affect culture, the language, the identity, and the future generations? And whose voices are missing from the decision about the resource use? So during my investigation, the elders spoke about the river as part of the collective memory. Women described spending hours digging for water in riverbeds. Youth reflected the loss of cultural connections to land and traditional livelihoods. So these perspectives are always absent from the mainstream reporting, yet they are very essential for understanding the full or the extent of the impact of environmental change. So Indigenous journalism also values knowledge systems that may not appear in the official reports. When community members compare present conditions with decades of lived experiences, that is an environmental evidence. So when pastoralists observe changes in water availability, the vegetation patterns, or maybe the seasonal cycles of rivers or environment, so those observations are really valuable and forms part of knowledge. So another important difference in terms of mainstream media is the accountability. They just I encountered this challenge on ground that when I went there was another media house which came and documented the story. But the people, the way they framed the story, it was really, the people didn't like, and they thought that I might be going to use them, don't know, to raise some funds, you know. So the important thing is accountability, that after producing the documentary, I return to the community to share their findings and facilitate a discussion. So it reflects an indigenous journalism principle that stories should circulate back to the people whose experiences made them possible. So finally, indigenous journalism contributes to environmental justice. It helps ensure that communities are not only subjects of reporting, but participants in shaping narratives about their territories, resources, and futures. In this case of Olkeria River, that story was not simply about sand. It was about the rights, the stewardship, the governance, the cultural survival itself, and the ability of indigenous communities to determine the future of their own lands. That perspective is what indigenous journalism bring to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you so much. And now I would like to request Nicodemus, like the questions that I asked. Okay, I asked for the previous fellows. I have two questions to you as well, Nicodemus. Whether it was dealing with the remote locations or getting people to open up, what were the toughest logistical or the personal challenges that you faced while documenting those stories that you just shared, the first one. And the second one is the mainstream climate reporting is often very academic, sometimes is very data heavy. And what does storytelling from the indigenous perspective actually bring to the climate conservations that kind of global or so-called mainstream media actually misses? And if you can just summarize in 3 minutes, please.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you so much, Dev. One of the biggest challenges, of course, was the geography of Kalahari district itself, as I alluded on earlier. The communities I visited are spread across vast distances in a semi-arid environment. So traveling between these villages requires long journeys on gravel roads, sometimes on sand, and weather conditions can sometimes even complicate access to certain locations because we are a community that hardly gets rain. And when we eventually do get rain, sometimes it gets catastrophic. You know, it destroys even your usual roads you had already, found a way to use them. So another challenge, of course, was balancing limited resources with the need to spend enough time in communities to build trust. Indigenous journalism relies heavily on relationships. You need to build trust with people, because for them to share willingly and share meaningful experiences, and they know that you respect them or you respect that culture, is because you've really made time to be with them. There was also the challenge of documenting climate change visually. Climate change is often gradual and not always immediately visible on camera. Therefore, much of the storytelling depended on people's observation, oral histories, and personal experiences. I had to find creative ways to combine interviews, landscapes, and everyday activities to communicate environmental challenges to some extent. On a personal level, really, some of the stories were emotional because they reflected concerns about cultural continuity, loss of traditional knowledge, and uncertainty about the future. Listening to elders speak about environmental changes affecting practices they have known their entire lives reminded me why documenting these stories was very important. Despite these challenges, community members were incredibly supportive and generous in sharing their experiences, which made the project really, really possible. With the last attempt to the last question, really, I believe Indigenous storytelling adds something very important to climate conversation, lived experiences and relationships and context. Mainstream climate reporting often focuses on statistics, scientific reports, and policy discussions. While those are important, they can sometimes overlook the climate changes as experienced by real people in their daily lives. Also, Indigenous communities have lived in many of these environments for generations. Our understanding of environmental change is rooted in observation, memory, culture, and direct interaction with nature. We notice changes in rainfall, wildlife behavior, climate availability, and seasonal patterns because our livelihoods and identities are closely connected to the environment. Our storytelling really emphasizes relationships than separation. It recognizes land, water, biodiversity, language, culture, and people are really interconnected through that aspect. When an ecosystem changes, it affects much more than the environment. It affects heritage, knowledge systems, and community well-being. What is also important, or was an important contribution actually, is resilience. How our communities, despite all this, have remained resilient. Because our stories are not only about problems, they are also about adaptation, solutions, and survival. Communities continue to innovate while drawing on traditional knowledge, and traditional knowledge that really helps them to navigate environmental challenges and uncertainty for generations. So I believe global climate discussions become stronger when Indigenous voices are included, not only as stakeholders, but also experts in Indigenous knowledge holding in their own right. So really, as I close, my fellowship taught me that when Indigenous peoples tell their stories through their language, climate change becomes much more than a scientific discussions, but it becomes a human story of resilience, knowledge, and responsibility for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicodemus, for briefly summarizing the questions that related with the obstacles and the role of the community media. Matthias, you already, I don't have follow-up questions to you, as you already briefed about the obstacles you faced, the role of the community radio or indigenous journalism as well. But I would like to give you like a minute if you miss something to, to emphasize on, or a last message in a minute, please.
The problem, indigenous community, we are not recognized, and we are not included in government policy making process. And because these are the challenge that community leaders and different group from our indigenous community have been raised, that we are trying to keep this environment. We are trying to keep, because we are a pastoralist community, we should be involved in decision-making process so that our opinion and our voice to be heard. Because Maasai treat land as a source of everything, source of life, identity, culture, and survival, not as a resource to exploit. So it is very much important that the government should recognize indigenous people to ensure climate policies respect indigenous rights, livelihoods, and cultural values, rather than displacing community from the ancestral lands. And by doing this, it helps to strengthen legal protection of indigenous lands, culture, and tradition, and recognize ecological knowledge of these people in national level and global and globally. So this is something that I wanted to add. And another recommendation, it is very much, it is better that every indigenous community worldwide have to support documentations of this indigenous community so that they can preserve their knowledge system for future generations. Because as I say that, they don't have a good library. You cannot find their stories. And sometimes the people who write their stories are the people coming outside. So it is better to support documentations and the preservation of indigenous knowledge system for future generations through community-led archive and research, but also educational platforms. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Matthias, and also all the panelists. This powerful session actually brought together. We actually had Cultural Survival had altogether 7 incredible indigenous journalists who did a fellowship program last year. Only 5 of them actually were able to join today, who actually risking everything to uncover unseen crisis, from state violence in India to the environmental destruction in Africa, and also some colleagues did investigation also in Mexico. By overcoming all logistical or safety hurdles, the fellows actually proved that community or indigenous rooted storytelling is really important to expose the corporate and government outreach. And ultimately, the investigative reports that they produced actually shows that indigenous journalism doesn't just report about the problems. It also elevates the indigenous wisdom as an actual solution for climate resilience and human rights. So with this, now in other sections actually is a space for answering the questions spatially posed in the Q&A feature of the Zoom, and there is one question that is actually directed to Akas. Lori Johnston actually asked you, and he basically says that thank you, Akas, for sharing. And the people are the people and communities affected by mining able to direct the support they need in accordance with there is one of the voluntary guidelines on the governance tenure, which is actually uploaded in FAO.org. And Lodi actually asked, is the state not respecting the recommendations to support community infrastructure that supports collective tenure? Or was this community already individualized before the mining actually came in? Akash, if you can answer within a minute, that would be appreciated. Thank you. You are mute. Akash, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. There is an act called Forest Rights Act 2005, which came in 2005, and this gives the community forest rights, what you are probably calling a collective kind of rights over the land. And there has been, even though the law has come, there has been a lot of cases of obviously, the law has not been implemented and the community forest right is rejected. In fact, one of the mines that I covered, the second Adani coal mine, had their community forest rights rejected just like a year ago. Right, so even though there are laws in place, the government is not, and these communities were not individualized. They were sort of like they're still living in collective, but mining in this region starts from 1930s. So it's a pre-independence colonial period during which the mining extraction begins. So it's a quite longer history of mining in this area, you can say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Akash. And in the Q&A feature, there is only one questions, but also some colleagues are engaging in answering to the questions directly asked to the fellows or the panelists as well. And actually that brings to the closing of our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar, which is titled On the Front Lines, Investigative Indigenous Journalists in Action. We continue organizing a similar kind of webinars along with other works. Please consider making a donations at cs.org/donate to support our work and also stay informed about the future events through our social media platforms. If you would like to receive our newsletter directly in your inbox and stay informed about our work supporting indigenous communities around the world, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter by visiting the link provided in the chat that our colleagues actually shared in chat. And also some of the guests actually have requested to share the email of the fellows. So we have actually posted directly the fellows profile as well in our websites. Or you also can leave your own email in the chat as well, so that we can directly, our colleagues actually have saved your email so that we can share the reportings as well and all the questions that you have. So we'll try to answer. Thank you and see you next time. You can also learn more about cultural survival by visiting cs.org. You also can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and also Facebook at Cultural Survival. Tere Dumen, bye-bye, and namaste to everyone. Have a good day and good night. Thank you. And I would like to